Millionaire takes in a homeless woman and her daughter. What the girl says to his mother leaves him pale. Grandma, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing viewers from all over the world. Now, enjoy the story. The December wind cut through Manhattan like a knife, carrying snowflakes that danced in the golden glow of street lamps. Frank Williams pulled his cashmere coat tighter as he exited the towering glass building that housed Williams Enterprises. Despite the Forbes articles listing him among New York's wealthiest entrepreneurs, Frank preferred to walk these 3 blocks every evening rather than summon his driver. A small rebellion against the isolation his wealth had gradually built around him. He was preoccupied with thoughts of his mother's worsening condition when he felt something fall from his pocket. Before he could turn, a soft voice called out behind him, "Sir, sir, you dropped this." Frank turned to find a woman in her early 30s, her beauty unmistakable, despite the worn clothes and exhaustion etched on her face. She held out his leather wallet, her hand trembling slightly from the cold. Beside her stood the most remarkable child Frank had ever seen. A little girl no more than 5 years old with golden curls framing an angelic face. The child's eyes, a striking shade of blue, met his with an intensity that seemed almost familiar. "Thank you," Frank said, accepting the wallet. "There's over $2,000 in here. You could have just taken it." The woman's chin lifted slightly. "We may not have much, sir, but we have our dignity." Something in her voice, pride mingled with desperation, made Frank pause. The little girl suddenly coughed, a harsh sound that shook her tiny frame. "Mommy, I'm cold," she whispered, clutching a threadbare teddy bear. The woman knelt down, wrapping her thin jacket more securely around the child. "I know, Lily. We'll find somewhere warm soon." Frank found himself unable to walk away. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" "The shelter on 43rd, if they're not full yet," the woman replied without looking up. "I'm Abby, by the way, Abby Cooper, and this is my daughter Lily." As she spoke, Lily's gaze remained fixed on Frank with that same unsettling familiarity. She tilted her head, studying him as if trying to place his face. "The shelters are overcrowded this time of year," Frank said, surprising himself with what came next. "I have room at my home, just for tonight until you figure something out." Abby immediately stiffened. "We don't accept charity from strangers." "It's not charity," Frank insisted, though he couldn't explain why this mattered so much suddenly. "It's just human decency. Your daughter is sick." As if on cue, Lily coughed again, and Frank noticed the flush on her cheeks that wasn't from the cold. "Fever." Abby hesitated, looking down at her daughter, then back at Frank with suspicion and the barest flicker of desperate hope. "Just one night," she finally conceded. "For Lily's sake." As Frank hailed a taxi, he caught Lily whispering something to her mother. Abby's expression changed to one of confusion as she glanced quickly at Frank. "What is it?" he asked. "Nothing," Abby replied too. Quickly. "Just something silly," Lily said. But as they settled into the warmth of the taxi, Frank couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was something more than chance. Nor could he ignore Lily's eyes that seemed to look straight through him, holding secrets he couldn't begin to understand. What Frank Williams didn't know was that this single act of impulsive kindness was about to unravel a tapestry of secrets that had been carefully concealed for decades within the walls of his family mansion. Frank's black sedan pulled up to an imposing iron gate that opened silently to reveal a majestic estate nestled in Beacon Hill's most exclusive enclave. As the car wound its way through snow-dusted gardens, Lily pressed her small hands against the window, her eyes wide with wonder. Or was it recognition? "This is where you live?" Abby asked, unable to mask her astonishment. "It's been in my family for generations," Frank replied modestly, watching Lily's reaction carefully. The car stopped before a grand entrance where a stern-looking woman in her 60s stood waiting, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun. "This is Mrs. Diane," Frank explained as they entered. "She's been our family's housekeeper since before I was born." Diane's welcoming smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she assessed the newcomers. Mr. Williams, I wasn't aware we were expecting guests. A last-minute arrangement, Frank replied. Abby and Lily need a place for the night. Please prepare the blue guest room. As Diane led them through the marble foyer, Lily suddenly stopped before a portrait of an elderly woman with piercing blue eyes. Is she sleeping? The child asked, pointing to the painting. Frank's expression softened. No, Lily. That's my mother, Eleanor. She's very ill, which is why we need to be quiet upstairs. I know how to be quiet, Lily whispered with such solemnity that Frank felt an unexpected tug at his heart. While Diane showed Abby to their room, Frank noticed Lily wandering toward a specific hallway, as if drawn there by some invisible force. She paused at each family photograph, studying them with unusual intensity. Lily, stay close, Abby called, noticing her daughter's wandering. It's quite all right, Frank said, though something about the child's behavior unsettled him. She seems comfortable here. Later, as they shared a simple dinner in the kitchen, Abby reluctantly revealed fragments of their story, how she'd lost her job at a downtown restaurant 3 months ago, how the landlord had evicted them despite her pleas for more time, how each day since had been a desperate battle for survival. Tomorrow I'll help you find something more permanent, Frank offered. What he didn't say was how strange it felt to have them at his table, particularly Lily, whose mannerisms and curious glances around the mansion seemed oddly familiar, as if she were returning to a place she somehow knew. After dinner, as Diane cleared the dishes with barely concealed suspicion, Lily suddenly asked, "Can I see the room with the blue walls and the piano?" Frank froze. He hadn't shown them that room. His mother's private music room painted her favorite shade of cornflower blue. How could the child possibly know about it? As dawn broke over the Williams estate, Diane moved silently through the mansion's hallways, her mind troubled by what she'd observed overnight. She paused outside the guest room, hearing Lily's soft humming, a melody that sent chills down her spine. It was Eleanor's lullaby, a tune so personal that only family members knew it. Diane entered the kitchen to find Lily already there, confidently, opening the exact cabinet where cookies had been kept for decades. "How did you know where those were, child?" Diane asked, trying to mask her suspicion. Lily shrugged. They looked like they belonged there. Later that morning, while showing them the library, Frank watched as Lily walked directly to a hidden panel that concealed Eleanor's favorite books. "This opens, doesn't it?" she asked innocently, pressing the spot that released the mechanism. Frank exchanged a troubled glance with Diane. "Yes, it does. How did you know that?" Before Lily could answer, Abby quickly intervened. Lily has always been observant. She notices patterns others miss. During lunch, Lily suddenly looked up from her plate. "When can we see the room with the piano? The blue one?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. "I never mentioned a blue room with a piano," Frank said carefully. "You must have," Abby insisted, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Or perhaps she saw a photograph. That evening, Diane cornered Frank in his study. "There's something not right about that child," she whispered. "She knows things she couldn't possibly know." "They're just coincidences," Frank replied, though uncertainty clouded his eyes. "She found the hidden garden key this afternoon, the one behind the third book on the east shelf. No one knows about that key except family." Frank ran his fingers through his hair. "What are you suggesting?" "I don't know what to think," Diane admitted. "But that child moves through this house like she's been here before." From the doorway came Abby's voice, startling them both. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I think perhaps we should leave tomorrow." "No," Frank said decisively. "Please stay, at least until Lily's fever breaks completely." What he didn't say was that he needed answers to the questions forming in his mind. Questions about Lily's uncanny knowledge of the house, about the strange feeling of recognition he experienced whenever he looked into her eyes. That night, Frank dreamed of his estranged brother Richard, dead these past 3 years. In the dream, Richard was trying to tell him something important, pointing repeatedly to a photograph that Frank couldn't quite see. He woke with one thought. There were secrets in his family home that had been buried too long, and somehow, This child might be the key to uncovering them all. That night, unable to sleep, Frank wandered the dimly lit corridors of his ancestral home. A faint light spilling from the library door caught his attention. He approached quietly, expecting to find Diane completing her evening routine. Instead, he found Lily sitting cross-legged on the Persian rug, surrounded by old family photo albums. "Lily." "It's nearly midnight," Frank said softly, trying not to startle her. The child looked up calmly, as if finding a millionaire's heir in his pajamas was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm looking for someone," she replied simply, her small fingers turning another page with deliberate care. "Who are you looking for?" Frank asked, settling beside her. Lily shrugged, her eyes never leaving the photographs. "I'll know when I find them." The moonlight filtering through the tall windows caught something glinting at Lily's neck. Frank leaned closer and noticed a delicate silver medallion hanging from a thin chain, an antique piece with an intricate floral design surrounding what appeared to be a family crest. His breath caught. The medallion looked remarkably similar to an heirloom his mother had described losing years ago, a piece that had been in the Williams family for generations. "That's a beautiful necklace," he said carefully. "Where did you get it?" "It was my grandmother's," Lily replied, touching it gently. "Mommy says she never met her, but she gave it to Mommy before she went to heaven." Frank felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. With trembling hands, he reached for his phone and snapped a discreet photo of the medallion, while Lily returned to her examination of the albums. "Let's get you back to bed," he suggested after a moment. "Your mother will worry if she wakes and finds you gone." After tucking Lily in beside a sleeping Abby, Frank retreated to his study. With shaking hands, he pulled out boxes of old family documents his mother had meticulously archived. Hours passed as he sifted through yellowed papers, birth certificates, and correspondence. Just before dawn, he found it, a bundle of letters addressed to his brother Richard, tied with a faded ribbon. The sender's name caught his eye, Margaret Bennett. The final letter, dated January 1996, contained a passage that made his blood run cold. "I will cherish what we had, but I cannot continue to hope for a future that your family has made impossible. By the time you read this, I will be gone, taking with me the only piece of the Williams legacy I have left, the medallion your mother accused me of stealing." Frank sat back, mind racing. Could it be possible? He needed to know more about this Margaret, and why her name had never been mentioned in the Williams household. As the first rays of sunlight streaked across the sky, Frank made a decision. He would confront Diane about Margaret Bennett, the woman whose existence seemed to have been carefully erased from the family history. What connection could she possibly have to Abby and Lily? And why did a homeless child possess a medallion that had been in the Williams family for generations? The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 9, as Frank found Diane meticulously arranging fresh flowers in the foyer. Steeling himself, he approached with casual deliberation. "Diane, does the name Margaret Bennett mean anything to you?" The crystal vase in her hands trembled slightly. A momentary loss of composure she quickly recovered. "I'm not sure I recall anyone by that name." "Mr. Williams." The lie hung between them, transparent and fragile. "Strange," Frank continued, watching her face. "I found several letters addressed to Richard from a Margaret Bennett. They seemed intimate." Diane busied herself with the flowers, avoiding his. Your brother knew many young women before his engagement. I wouldn't read too much into old correspondence." Her dismissal only strengthened Frank's resolve. "I think I'll ask Mother about her. She might remember." Diane's head snapped up. "Eleanor isn't well enough for questions about the past. You know, how agitated she becomes." "Nevertheless," Frank replied firmly, "I need answers." He found his mother propped against pillows in her sunlit bedroom, a rare moment of lucidity brightening her tired eyes. At 78, Eleanor Williams remained regal despite the illness that had ravaged her body. The family resemblance between her and Frank was striking. The same determined jawline, the same penetrating blue eyes. "A pleasant surprise," Eleanor said, her voice frail but clear. You rarely visit in the mornings. Frank sat beside her, carefully choosing his words. Mother, I've been going through some old family papers. Always the dutiful son, she murmured with approval. I found mentions of people who worked here years ago. Do you remember someone named Margaret? The change was instantaneous. Eleanor's composure faltered, her fingers clutching the bedsheet. Why would you ask about her? Just curious. She seems to have been important to Richard. Some people, Eleanor said with sudden coldness, are better forgotten, Franklin. Margaret was a temporary employee who betrayed this family's trust. Nothing more. What did she do? That's enough questions for today. Eleanor turned away, a clear dismissal. I'm tired now. But Frank wasn't ready to surrender. She had a Williams family medallion, the one you said was stolen. Eleanor's eyes flashed with an anger that transcended her physical weakness. She took more than a trinket from this family, Franklin. Now please, leave me to rest. As Frank left his mother's room, his mind raced with possibilities. Eleanor's reaction confirmed that Margaret was significant, perhaps dangerously so. And somewhere in this web of secrets lay the explanation for Lily's uncanny connection to the Williams home. In the hallway, he nearly collided with Lily, who looked up at him with those eerily familiar blue eyes. Your grandmother doesn't like to remember, she said simply. Frank stared at the child, a chill running down his spine. What did you say? But Lily only smiled enigmatically before skipping away, humming Eleanor's lullaby as she disappeared around the corner. Diane had spent 40 years in service to the Williams family. She prided herself on loyalty, discretion, and above all, protecting Eleanor's interests. Now, a strange woman and her unusually perceptive child had infiltrated the sanctuary she'd guarded so carefully. That afternoon, Diane began her surveillance. From the corner of her eye, she observed Abby examining the craftsmanship of an antique desk with unusual intensity. Later, she caught her studying family photographs in the hallway, lingering particularly on those featuring Richard. Beautiful family, Abby commented when she noticed Diane watching. Frank looks so much like his brother. You recognize Richard? Diane asked sharply. Frank mentioned him, Abby replied quickly, too quickly. That evening, while delivering fresh towels, Diane observed Abby through the half-open door of the guest room. The young woman was holding Lily's medallion, examining it with a troubled expression. Mommy, when are we going to tell them? Lily whispered. Shh. Not now, Abby whispered back. It's complicated. Tell them what? Diane wondered, retreating silently. Well past midnight, a floorboard's creak alerted Diane to movement downstairs. Wrapping her robe tightly around herself, she descended to find a light glowing from beneath Frank's office door. She approached, cautiously, and peered through the keyhole. Abby stood at Frank's desk, rifling through papers with practiced efficiency. Diane pushed the door open without warning. Looking for something? She asked coldly. Abby straightened, visibly startled. I couldn't sleep. Lily wanted a storybook, and Frank mentioned there might be some in here. In his private office, at 1 a.m. I'm sorry for the intrusion, Abby said, backing toward the door. I should have asked first. After Abby retreated upstairs, Diane went straight to Frank's bedroom, knocking sharply until he answered, bleary-eyed. They're not what they seem, she insisted. I caught her searching your office just now. Frank rubbed his eyes. Perhaps she was just… No, Diane interrupted. They're here for something specific. The way the child knows this house, the medallion, now this midnight searching. They're connected to Margaret somehow. I'm certain of it. Frank's expression hardened. Let me handle this, Diane. You're too close to see it clearly, she persisted. There's something familiar about that woman, something that reminds me of… I said I'll handle it, Frank cut her off. Left alone, Frank paced his room, conflicted. The evidence suggested deception, yet he couldn't silence an inner voice urging him to trust Abby and Lily. There was something about the child especially, a connection he couldn't explain or dismiss. Tomorrow, he decided he would delve deeper, into the family archives. If Abby and Lily had come searching for something in the Williams mansion, he was determined to find it first. Rain pelted against the leaded glass windows, transforming the afternoon into premature dusk. Frank had reluctantly left for an emergency board meeting, leaving Abby and Lily in Diane's watchful care. "May I explore upstairs?" Lily asked, her innocent tone contrasting with the knowing look in her eyes. Diane hesitated. "The attic isn't a place for children." "Please?" Lily persisted. "I promise to be careful." Something in the child's earnest expression softened Diane's resolve. "Very well, but don't touch anything." Lily climbed the narrow staircase with surprising confidence for a child visiting for the first time. The attic was a treasure trove of Williams' family history, furniture draped in white sheets, trunks packed with memorabilia, walls lined with paintings too unfashionable for the main house. When Frank returned hours later, he found Lily sitting cross-legged amidst piles of dusty photo albums. She held one photograph with particular reverence, staring at it with intense concentration. "What have you found there?" Frank asked, approaching quietly. Lily didn't seem surprised by his presence. Without looking up, she handed him the photograph. It showed the Williams family at what appeared to be a summer garden party. Frank recognized his parents, himself as a teenager, and Richard in his early 20s. Standing beside Richard was a striking young woman with features so familiar that Frank nearly dropped the frame. She was unmistakably Abby, or someone who could be her identical twin. With trembling fingers, Frank turned the photograph over. On the back, in his mother's elegant handwriting, "Family Williams with Margaret, 1995. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. The woman in the photo, Margaret Bennett from the letters, was the spitting image of Abby Cooper. "You found what you were looking for?" Frank whispered, staring at Lily with new understanding. The little girl nodded solemnly. "Mommy said that someday we would find our family." Her small fingers touched the face of young Richard in the photograph. "Is that him?" The sound of footsteps on the attic stairs interrupted the moment. Abby appeared, freezing when she saw the photograph in Frank's hands. "Lily, it's time for your bath," she said tightly. "She looks exactly like you," Frank said, holding up the photograph. "My mother," Abby admitted, her voice barely audible. "Margaret Bennett." The three remained motionless in the dusty attic light, Frank holding the evidence of a long-buried family secret, Abby caught between flight and confession, and Lily watching them both with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than her years. "I think," Frank said with careful deliberation, "it's time we had an honest conversation about why you're really here." Frank sat in his study, the rain continuing its relentless percussion against the windows. Across from him, Abby perched nervously, on the edge of a leather chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "So Margaret Bennett was your mother?" Frank said, breaking the tense silence. "Did she send you here?" "My mother died 2 years ago," Abby replied quietly. "Breast cancer. She never sent me anywhere." "Then why are you here? Why this elaborate charade?" Abby's eyes flashed with indignation. "This wasn't planned. When you dropped your wallet, I had no idea who you were. It wasn't until we arrived here that I began to recognize things from my mother's stories." Frank studied her face, searching for deception. Finding none, he made a decision. "I need to know everything, Abby, starting with who your father was." "I don't know," she admitted. "Mom never told me his name. She only said he came from a powerful family that didn't want him involved with someone like her." The implication hung heavy in the air between them. "I'm hiring someone to investigate," Frank said firmly. "A professional who can find the truth." The following morning, Frank met with Samuel Thornton, a private investigator known for his discretion. He provided what little information he had: Margaret Bennett's name, her employment at the Williams estate in the mid-1990s, and her sudden departure. "Find everything you can about her," Frank instructed, "and determine if there's any connection between Margaret and my brother Richard." While Samuel began his investigation, Frank visited the county records office. Hours of searching yielded a single crucial document. A birth certificate for Abigail Bennett, born March 12, 1997, approximately 9 months after Margaret's abrupt departure from the Williams household. The father's name was conspicuously absent. Back at the mansion, Frank found Abby in the garden with Lily. Seeing his troubled expression, she sent Lily to help Diane with lunch preparations. "I found your birth certificate," Frank said without preamble. Abby nodded slowly. "And?" "You were born 9 months after my brother Richard broke off his engagement to Eliza Vandermeer, an alliance my mother had orchestrated for years." "My mother never spoke his name," Abby said, her voice thick with emotion. "She only left me this." From beneath her blouse, she withdrew the medallion. "She said it belonged to my family, though not to her, that someday it might lead me home." Frank stared at the family heirloom, the pieces falling into place. "Richard searched for someone after the broken engagement. Mother said he was having a breakdown, but perhaps he was looking for my mother," Abby finished softly. "And now you've found your way back," Frank whispered, "bringing Richard's daughter and possibly his granddaughter home." Eleanor Williams sat in her wheelchair by the window, gazing at the garden as snowflakes began to drift from a steel-gray sky. The medication had cleared her mind today, a temporary respite from the fog that increasingly claimed her thoughts. When Frank knocked on the door, she turned with a smile that faded at the sight of the small girl holding his hand. "Mother," Frank said carefully, "I'd like you to meet someone. This is Lily." Eleanor's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "The child staying with us?" "Yes. I thought you might enjoy some company this morning." Frank guided Lily forward, while signaling to Abby to wait in the hallway, out of Eleanor's sight. The plan was simple. See Eleanor's reaction to Lily before revealing everything. Lily approached the elderly woman without hesitation, studying her face with that peculiar intensity Frank had noticed from the beginning. "Hello," Eleanor said stiffly, unused to children. Lily reached out and touched Eleanor's hand, a gesture so natural it seemed to surprise even the child herself. "Your ring is pretty," she said, pointing to the sapphire on Eleanor's finger. "It was my grandmother's," Eleanor replied, something softening in her expression. "Someday it would have gone to Richard's wife, but—" She trailed off, a shadow crossing her face. "The music box plays the same song," Lily said suddenly, pointing to an ornate silver box on Eleanor's nightstand. Eleanor stiffened. "How do you know what song it plays?" Instead of answering, Lily began to hum the distinctive melody that Frank had heard her sing before, the family lullaby that had been passed down through generations of Williams women. The color drained from Eleanor's face. "Who taught you that song?" she whispered. "My grandma. Before she went to heaven." Eleanor's hands began to tremble. "What was your grandmother's name, child?" "Margaret," Lily answered simply. The single word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Eleanor's eyes darted to Frank, filled with a mixture of shock and something that might have been fear. At that moment, Abby stepped into the doorway, unable to remain hidden any longer. For several heartbeats, Eleanor stared at her as though seeing a ghost. "Margaret?" she finally whispered. "No," Frank said gently. "This is Abby, Margaret's daughter." Eleanor's breathing became labored, her frail hands clutching at the armrests of her wheelchair. "How is this possible?" "I think you know, Mother," Frank said quietly. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, spilling down her wrinkled cheeks. "Richard?" she murmured, looking at Abby with dawning recognition. "You have his eyes." Lily approached Eleanor again, placing her small hand over the older woman's. "You're the vovo," she said with absolute certainty, using the Portuguese term for grandmother that Margaret had taught her. The floodgates broke. With a sob that seemed to rise from the depths of her soul, Eleanor began to speak, haltingly at first, then in a torrent of confession. "Margaret was a housekeeper here, one of many I hired from the Brazilian community. She was intelligent, educated, working to save for university. Richard was captivated by her from the beginning. I noticed, of course, but thought it merely an infatuation. Eleanor paused, gathering strength. When she became pregnant, Richard wanted to break his engagement to Eliza, to marry Margaret instead. It would have destroyed everything. Our standing, the merger with Vandermeer Industries, everything I had worked decades to build. What did you do? Frank asked, though he already suspected. I paid her to leave. When she refused, I threatened to have her deported, to ensure she would never find employment again. I told Richard she had accepted money to disappear, that she had never loved him. Eleanor's voice broke. The cruelest lie of all. You separated them deliberately, Abby said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. My mother raised me alone, working 3 jobs sometimes while my father never knew I existed. Richard searched for her, Eleanor admitted. For years, I intercepted his inquiries, had our lawyers block his attempts to locate her. When he died 3 years ago, he still kept her photograph by his bed. The room fell silent except for the soft ticking of the mantel clock and Eleanor's ragged breathing. I cannot undo what I've done, she finally said, looking directly at Abby. But perhaps before I die, I can begin to make amends. With trembling fingers, Eleanor removed the sapphire ring from her hand. This belongs to you now, she said, holding it out to Abby. As Richard's daughter, as a Williams, it is your birthright. Frank watched as histories, lies, and truths converged in his mother's sunlit room, the past finally catching up to claim its due. For 3 days following Eleanor's confession, Abby retreated to the guest room, emerging only for meals that she barely touched. Frank gave her space, understanding the magnitude of what she'd learned, that her mother had been forced away, that her father had never abandoned them willingly, that her entire life had been built on a foundation of half-truths, on. The 4th morning, Frank found Abby's door ajar. The room was empty, her bed neatly made. A momentary panic seized him until he glimpsed movement in the garden below. Through the frost-etched window, he watched Abby sitting alone on a stone bench, her breath forming clouds in the winter air. She clutched something in her hands. The letters from Richard that Frank had given her, discovered in a locked drawer of his brother's desk. Meanwhile, Lily had formed an unexpected bond with Eleanor. The child spent hours by the elderly woman's side, listening to stories of the Williams family history, as if reclaiming a birthright that had been denied her. Eleanor, for her part, seemed transformed by the child's presence, more lucid, more engaged, as if determined to remain present long enough to forge this new connection. She has Richard's laugh, Eleanor confided to Frank one evening after Lily had fallen asleep beside her. And his curiosity. How strange that blood speaks so loudly, across generations. Frank nodded, thinking of his brother, brilliant, rebellious Richard, who had never quite fit the mold their mother had crafted for him. He would have loved her, both of them. That night, unable to sleep, Frank wandered to the kitchen for tea. He was surprised to find Abby in the moonlit garden, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the December chill. He joined her silently, offering a second cup of steaming tea. I keep thinking about parallel lives, Abby said finally. The life I might have had if your mother hadn't interfered, the life my mother deserved. I can't change the past, Frank replied softly. But perhaps we can build something from these fragments. I don't even know who I am anymore, Abby admitted. Abby Cooper, daughter of a single mother who worked herself to exhaustion? Or Abigail Bennett Williams, heir to a fortune built on power and privilege? Why not both? Frank suggested. You are the bridge between worlds, just as Lily will be. For the first time since the revelation, Abby's lips curved into a hesitant smile. My mother would have appreciated that irony. She always said identity isn't something you find, it's something you forge from whatever materials life provides. As dawn broke over the mansion, painting the snow-covered gardens in hues of pink and gold, they sat together, uncle and niece, strangers and family, contemplating the peculiar paths that had led them to this moment of tentative understanding. The library's fire crackled softly as Frank placed a leather-bound journal in Abby's hands. Its pages were worn thin with frequent turning, the margins filled with notes in a precise slanting script she'd never seen before. These were Richard's private thoughts, Frank explained. I thought it might help you know the man your mother fell in love with, the father you never met. Abby ran her fingers over the cover reverently. I'm not sure I'm ready. Take your time, Frank said gently. They'll be here when you are. The days fell into a tentative new rhythm. Frank rearranged his work schedule, conducting business from home to help Abby and Lily settle into their unexpected heritage. Each morning, he would find Lily in Eleanor's room, absorbing family stories with insatiable curiosity. Each evening, he would spot Abby in the garden or library, gradually working through Richard's journals, building a portrait of her father piece by piece. He wasn't what I expected, Abby confided one evening. Mother always described him as passionate and creative, but these journals show someone thoughtful, even philosophical. Richard contained multitudes, Frank smiled. Mother tried to mold him into a businessman, but his mind was always elsewhere. Art, literature, humanitarian causes. Things that didn't fit the Williams legacy she envisioned. Did he ever stop searching for her? Abby asked, the question she'd been avoiding for days. Frank's expression sobered. Never. I found investigator reports dating to just weeks before his accident. He never gave up hope. On the 10th day, Eleanor requested a private audience with Abby. Frank helped his mother into her sitting room, then retreated, leaving the two women alone with decades of complicated history between them. Hours later, Abby emerged, her eyes red but her shoulders straighter, as if a weight had been partially lifted. When Frank inquired about their conversation, she simply said, "Some wounds need air to heal properly." That night at dinner, Lily looked around the table, at Diane placing dishes with her customary precision, at Eleanor watching her with newfound tenderness, at Frank and Abby sitting side by side with their unmistakable family resemblance. "Are we going to be a real family now?" she asked with a child's directness. The question hung in the air, simple yet impossibly complex. "We already are a family, Lily," Frank answered carefully. "Just one that's finding its way." As snow fell softly outside, blanketing the gardens in pristine white, 4 people bound by blood, choice, and circumstance shared a meal in the Williams mansion. Not yet healed, not yet whole, but taking their first tentative steps toward whatever new future they might create together from the broken pieces of the past. Frank parked the car across from a weathered brick apartment building in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood. The modest structure stood in stark contrast to the Williams estate. Yet as Abby gazed up at the third-floor windows, her expression was one of reverence. "This is where we lived," she said softly. "Mom and I shared the corner apartment for 15 years before she got sick." Frank noticed how Lily pressed her small face against the car window, studying the building with solemn attention. "Would you like to go inside?" "Is that possible?" Abby asked, surprise evident in her voice. "I made some calls," Frank replied. "The current tenant is away, and the landlord owed me a favor. We have an hour." The apartment was small but flooded, with natural light. Though the furnishings had changed, Abby moved through the space with practiced familiarity, running her fingers along walls where pictures once hung, pausing at windows where her mother had tended herb gardens in clay pots. "Mom's bedroom was here," she said, opening a door. "She kept all her important things in a loose floorboard beneath the bed." Lily dropped to her knees, crawling under the current tenant's bed frame. "Like this one?" she called out, her fingers already prying at an edge. Frank and Abby exchanged a startled look before joining her. Sure enough, one floorboard lifted easily, revealing a small space beneath. Inside lay a metal box, dusty with age. "She must have left it when we moved to the hospice," Abby whispered, lifting it reverently. Inside were treasures of a life carefully preserved, photographs of Margaret holding infant Abby, trinkets from Brazil, and most significantly, a bundle of letters, all addressed to Richard, all stamped, but never mailed. With trembling hands, Abby opened one dated just months before her birth. "My dearest Richard, I carry our child beneath my heart now. Despite everything, I cannot regret the love that created this life. I will not send this letter. Not because I don't long for you, but because I refuse to be the force that tears you from your family legacy. Know that I will tell our child of your goodness, if not your name." Tears streamed down Abby's face as she realized the truth. Her mother had protected her not from rejection, but from becoming the center of a family war. Margaret had chosen a harder path to spare both Richard and her daughter from Eleanor's manipulations. Their next stop was Richard's former office at Williams Enterprises. As Frank led them through the executive floor, heads turned at the striking resemblance between him and Abby. In Richard's preserved office, Frank unlocked a private safe. "This is what I wanted to show you," he said, extracting legal documents. Richard established a trust fund in 2001 for future beneficiaries to be determined. He funded it annually until his death. Abby stared at the substantial sum. "He created this without knowing about me?" "I think," Frank said gently, "that on some level he never stopped hoping he'd find Margaret and whatever family they might have created." As they left the building, Lily skipped ahead, then turned back with a smile that mirrored Richard's in the photographs Frank had shown them. "Now we know where we came from," she said with a child's simple wisdom, "and where we're going." Eleanor's health deteriorated steadily over the following weeks. The doctor spoke in hushed tones about limited time and making her comfortable. But in an unexpected twist, her spirit seemed to gain strength even as her body failed her. The bitter edge that had defined her for decades softened in the presence of Abby and Lily. On a bright January afternoon, Frank paused in the doorway of the music room, captivated by the scene before him. Eleanor sat at the grand piano, her frail fingers guiding Lily's small hands across the ivory keys. Together they played the Williams family lullaby, the melody that had first revealed Lily's mysterious connection to the house. "My mother taught me," Eleanor explained, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "And her mother before her. Now it passes to you, little one." "And someday I'll teach my children," Lily responded solemnly. Eleanor smiled. "Yes, you will." Frank slipped away unnoticed, finding Abby in what had been Richard's old room. She had gradually claimed the space, filling it with her own possessions while keeping his photographs on the walls, a merging of past and present that felt right somehow. "I spoke with the board today," Frank said, leaning against the doorframe. "I've initiated the paperwork to recognize you officially as Richard's daughter and heir to his portion of Williams Enterprises." Abby looked up from the book she'd been reading, one of Richard's favorites judging by the well-worn spine. "Was there resistance?" "Some," Frank admitted. Pendleton and Rogers expressed concerns about sudden heirs appearing from nowhere. "But DNA doesn't lie, and frankly, you have Richard's stubbornness written all over your face." This earned a reluctant smile from Abby. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that world. Then we'll take it slowly. But the place exists for you when you want it." That evening, the four of them shared dinner in the formal dining room for the first time. Eleanor had insisted on being dressed properly for the occasion, wearing an elegant sapphire dress that matched the ring now adorning Abby's finger. Diane had prepared all of Richard's favorite dishes, a silent acknowledgement of the shifting dynamics within the household. "To family," Frank proposed, raising his glass. "Lost and found." Eleanor nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Abby touched her glass to his, the sapphire ring catching the chandelier's light, and Lily, looking around at the adults with satisfaction, raised her juice glass with all the solemnity of a child who understood more than anyone realized. "To Uncle Frank," she said clearly, using the term for the first time. The simple phrase hung in the air, an acceptance, a new beginning. Frank felt something tight within his chest loosen, a knot of loneliness he'd carried since Richard's death finally beginning to unravel. Later that night, as snow fell gently outside, Frank worked, in his study, reviewing documents for the official recognition of Abby's lineage. A soft knock interrupted him. "The board members who oppose me," Abby said without preamble as she entered. "They were loyal to Eleanor's vision, weren't they? The same people who helped her separate my parents." Frank nodded slowly. "Some of them, yes." "Then perhaps it's time for a new vision at Williams Enterprises," she said, a determination in her voice that was unmistakably Richard's, one that honors what could have been while building what still can be. As she outlined her thoughts, Frank recognized that the final pieces were falling into place, not erasing the past but transforming it into a foundation for something new and unexpected. For the first time since Richard's death, the Williams family was no longer simply preserving a legacy, but creating one. Eleanor Williams summoned her attorney on a bitter February morning. The once formidable matriarch now appeared almost translucent against her white pillows, yet her blue eyes remained sharp, her mind unusually clear, a final gift before the inevitable end. "I need to make changes to my will," she informed Arnold Blackwood, her lawyer of 40 years. "And I wish to record a formal statement." Frank stood quietly by the window as the lawyer arranged documents on Eleanor's bedside table. Abby had been invited but chose to wait downstairs, still navigating the complex emotions Eleanor evoked in her. "I want to acknowledge Abigail Bennett as Richard's legitimate daughter and heir," Eleanor dictated firmly, "and her daughter Lily as Richard's granddaughter. They are to receive all portions of the estate previously allocated to Richard, along with my personal collection of jewelry and the summer house on Cape Cod." Arnold's pen scratched across the paper, his professional demeanor masking any surprise at this dramatic revision to the Williams legacy. "Furthermore," Eleanor continued, "I wish to record my role in separating Richard Williams and Margaret Bennett 29 years ago. The decisions were mine alone. Neither Frank nor anyone else in the family was aware of my actions." As Eleanor detailed her manipulation, the threats, the intercepted letters, the deliberate lies told to both Richard and Margaret, Frank watched the weight of decades-long deception lifting from her shoulders, piece by painful piece. After the lawyer departed with the revised documents, Frank sat beside his mother. "Why now, after all these years of secrecy?" "Because cowardice has its limits," Eleanor replied simply. "Even mine." That evening, Eleanor requested Abby's presence in her room. Frank helped arrange his mother in her favorite chair, then retreated, leaving the two women alone with the ghosts between them. Hours passed before Abby emerged, her eyes reddened but her posture somehow lighter. In her hands she carried the sapphire medallion that had once belonged to Richard's grandmother. "She asked for my forgiveness," Abby said quietly as she and Frank stood in the hallway. "For everything. And did you give it?" Frank asked. Abby gazed at the medallion, turning it over in her palm. "Not yet, maybe not ever completely." She looked up at him. "But I told her something my mother always said. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past, it's about not letting it control the future." The next morning, Abby entered Eleanor's room with Lily. The child carried a small wooden box containing the medallion, now polished and rethreaded on a new silver chain. "This belongs to the Williams family," Abby said, placing the box in Eleanor's trembling hands. "And you are Williams," Eleanor replied, removing the necklace and, with great effort, placing it around Lily's neck. "Both of you." The gesture, simple yet profound, marked the moment when truth finally eclipsed decades of carefully constructed lies. In the presence of Diane and Frank, Eleanor formally acknowledged what blood and birthright had always dictated, that Abby and Lily were, and had always been, rightful heirs to the Williams name. A gentle spring breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers through the open windows of the Williams mansion. 3 months had passed since Eleanor's peaceful passing, and the house that had once felt like a mausoleum of secrets now vibrated with new life. The East Wing, formerly closed off for decades, had been transformed according to Abby's vision. Gone were the heavy draperies and somber paintings, replaced by light-filled spaces where Lily's laughter echoed freely. Photographs of Margaret now hung proudly alongside Williams' family portraits, a visual testament to the truth finally embraced. Today marked the official opening of the Margaret Bennett Foundation, established on the Williams estate grounds. The organization would provide housing, education, and legal support for single mothers facing circumstances similar to Margaret's. Women with potential and dreams, needing only opportunity and advocacy to thrive. Frank stood at the podium on the newly constructed pavilion, facing a crowd of community leaders, press, and curious neighbors. Beside him, Abby wore a simple blue dress that mirrored her eyes, Richard's eyes, the sapphire medallion gleaming at her throat. Today we honor not just a building, but a transformation, Frank began. For generations, the Williams name has been associated with business achievement and social standing. Today, we expand that legacy to include compassion, reconciliation, and second chances. As he spoke, Frank observed the gathered crowd. Diane stood proudly in the front row, her initial suspicion of Abby and Lily long since transformed into fierce protectiveness. Board members who had initially resisted Abby's recognition now nodded along, won over by her intelligence and her uncanny resemblance to the brother they had all respected. My brother Richard never had the chance to know his daughter and granddaughter, Frank continued. But his spirit of generosity and his belief in human dignity live on through this foundation. We cannot rewrite the past, but we can ensure that others need not suffer the separations that marked our family history. After the speeches and ribbon cutting, as guests mingled over refreshments, Abby pulled Frank aside, her expression both nervous and joyful. "I have something to tell you," she said, placing a hand gently over her abdomen. "I'm pregnant." Frank's eyes widened in surprise and delight. "Abby, that's wonderful. Does Lily know?" "Not yet. I wanted you to be the first." She took his hands in hers. "This child will grow up knowing their full heritage from the beginning, the good and the difficult. No more secrets, no more half-truths." As sunset painted the gardens in gold, the remaining guests departed, leaving only the new Williams family. Lily approached Frank with solemn purpose, carrying something carefully in her small hands. "I fixed it," she declared, presenting him with the sapphire medallion, now cleaned and restored to its original brilliance. With surprising gentleness, she placed it around his neck. "Grandma Eleanor said it belongs to the heart of the family. That's you now." Frank felt tears spring to his eyes as he knelt to embrace his grandniece. Over Lily's shoulder, he caught Abby's gaze, the same determination that had characterized Richard, tempered now with a peace that Margaret had somehow, against all odds, instilled in her daughter. As twilight settled over the estate, Frank stood on the terrace overlooking the grounds where generations of Williams family members had walked before him. The foundation building glowed warmly in the distance, its lights a beacon of the new purpose they had found together. "Some families are formed by blood," he murmured, touching the medallion that now linked him to both past and future. "Others are forged through redemption. The strongest are both." Behind him, Lily's laughter mingled with Abby's voice as they discussed names for the coming baby. The mansion that had once housed so much pain and secrecy had been transformed, not by forgetting the past, but by finally bringing it into the light, allowing truth to heal what deception had wounded. The Williams family legacy hadn't ended with Eleanor's passing. Instead, it had been reborn, strengthened by the very trials that had once threatened to destroy it, a testament to the enduring power of love, truth, and the courage to begin again.